It all started on a warm Saturday morning, the kind where the sun comes through the curtains before you're even ready to wake up. I had planned to spend the day doing nothing more than cleaning up my room, helping Grandpa with a small project in the backyard, and maybe relaxing with a book. Nothing exciting, nothing dramatic. Just a quiet weekend at home. But life, as Grandpa always says, it's a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. I remember walking into the kitchen and smelling something familiar. Grandpa was already up, humming softly while frying eggs. He always woke up before me, no matter how early I tried to beat him. "Morning," I said as I plopped onto the chair. "Morning, kiddo," he replied, without turning around. "Eggs will be done in a minute." I smiled. Breakfast with Grandpa was always the best part of my mornings. We talked about everything from the birds on the power lines to the odd little stories he collected from neighbors. He had a calm way of looking at life, the kind that made even the craziest moments feel manageable. But that morning, neither of us had any idea what was happening just a few feet away. On the other side of our garage door, as soon as we finished eating, Grandpa handed me a short list of simple chores. "Sweep the porch, water the plants, and check the mail," he said. "Nice and easy. Then we'll start building that planter box." I nodded and stepped outside, enjoying the cool air before the heat returned for the day. The neighborhood was quiet, the way it usually stayed until late morning. A dog barked somewhere down the street, but other than that, everything was peaceful, until I reached the driveway. At first I froze because something didn't look right. Our garage door was slightly open, just a few inches. Grandpa always closed it completely, and he never left it cracked like that. He said small gaps let in dust and he couldn't stand extra cleaning. I walked closer, confused. Then I heard a low sound, something metallic. Like a soft clunk, my heart jumped. I crouched down and lifted the door enough to peek inside. There they were. Too large. Trucks, massive ones, squeezed inside our garage. Not ours. We didn't own anything like that. These were big, shiny, loud-looking vehicles that took up almost every inch of space. I stepped back, wondering if I was still half asleep. This wasn't real. Who would put 2 trucks in someone else's garage? And how did they even manage it without anyone noticing? I ran back inside. "Grandpa." He looked up immediately. "Everything all right?" "You have to come see this," I said, trying to stay calm. He followed me outside, wiping his hands on his apron. When we reached the garage, I lifted the door again just enough for him to see. His eyebrows rose, and for a moment he didn't say anything. Well, he finally murmured, "That's new." We both stepped back and stared at each other. "Did someone break in?" I asked. "Doesn't look like it," he replied quietly. "Door isn't damaged. They probably opened it with a remote or grabbed the code somehow." Felt a chill. But why put their trucks in here? Before Grandpa could answer, a voice called from across the yard. A sharp, annoyed voice. "Excuse me?" We turned to see a woman marching toward us. She lived a few houses down, and though we'd never had direct issues with her, everyone knew she complained a lot. About lawn height. About trash cans being slightly crooked. About kids riding bikes too fast. She always had something to say. She stopped in front of us with her arms crossed. "Yes, those trucks are mine," she announced, as if we had asked. Grandpa glanced at me, then at her. "Good morning. Any particular reason they're in my garage?" She waved her hand as if it was the most normal thing in the world. The street was being cleaned early, and I didn't want to get a ticket. The HOA said vehicles needed to be off the road for a few hours, so I put them somewhere safe. I blinked. "In our garage?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Your driveway was empty, and your garage looked unused. You don't put your car in there anyway. It's because we use it for other things," Grandpa replied, still calm. "But you can't just put your trucks in someone else's garage without permission." She rolled her eyes. "It's just for a few hours. Don't make a big deal out of nothing." I could almost feel Grandpa counting to 10 in his head. He always tried to avoid arguments even when he was right. Especially when he was right. "I understand you needed space," he said politely, "but you should have asked first." "There wasn't time," she snapped, "and it's not hurting anything. I'm busy today, so I'll move them later." With that, she walked away without another word. I turned to Grandpa. She can't just do that. No, he agreed quietly. She can't. For the rest of the morning, Grandpa went about his tasks, but I could tell the situation bothered him. Every now and then he'd glance toward the garage and sigh. We couldn't use our tools, couldn't grab anything from inside, and couldn't even start our project because the trucks filled every corner. Hours passed, and she still hadn't returned to move them by early afternoon. The sun was high, and the heat made the air shimmer. Grandpa and I sat on the porch with cold drinks. He rocked slowly in his chair, tapping one finger against the armrest. You know, he said after a long pause, even if she needed space, she should have talked to us. There's a way to handle things. Respect matters, I nodded. Do you think she'll come back soon? Hard to say. We waited longer. Another hour went by. Then another. Still no sign of her finally. Grandpa stood up. All right. Enough of this. Let's at least check what's going on in there. He walked back to the garage. Grandpa lifted the door fully this time, and the sunlight fell across the two trucks. They were spotless, polished, and clearly taken care of. It made the situation even stranger. Someone who treated their vehicles so carefully would casually leave them in someone else's garage without permission. Grandpa stepped inside to examine things. I followed close behind, careful not to touch anything. Everything looked normal except for the giant vehicles blocking the entire space. Nothing seemed broken or damaged. Nothing was missing. But then we heard footsteps. The woman came back, looking frustrated and hurried. Are you still worried about the trucks? She asked. Grandpa scratched his head. Ma'am, it's been hours. We have things we need from the garage. Well, I haven't had time to move them yet. I told you I would get to it later. She walked past us and climbed into one of the trucks. But instead of backing it out, she leaned out the window. Actually, I think I'm going to need them here till tomorrow morning. I'm going out tonight, and parking rules are still a mess. Grandpa's jaw tightened just a little. Not angry. Just firm. That won't work, he said. We need our space. You don't own the street, she replied. And I'm not hurting anything. It's not the street, he said gently. It's our garage. She waved him off again. It's temporary. Stop fussing. I'll deal with it tomorrow. Then she shut off the engine, got out, and started walking away again. Grandpa watched her go. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't even sigh. He simply walked to the garage door, looked at the trucks for a moment, then at the door mechanism. Then he did something that made my eyes widen. He pulled the garage door down all the way. With her inside, Grandpa started. He held up a hand. Just wait. Almost immediately, we heard a knock from inside. Open this. What are you doing? She shouted. Grandpa didn't answer right away. He walked to the house phone calmly, picked it up, and dialed. Who are you calling? I whispered. He gave me a little smile. The local authorities. I think they should help sort this out. I swallowed. But is this okay? She entered our property without permission, he said gently, and she refused to leave when asked. We're not being unkind. We're doing what we need to do to set things right, and we'll let the proper people handle the rest. Even though his plan made me nervous, I trusted him. Grandpa never did anything reckless. He only ever acted with a calm sense of reason as he spoke to the person on the other end of the line. Explaining the situation in simple and polite terms, I stood nearby listening to the muffled shouts from the garage, and that was how everything truly began. Wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was the start of something none of us could have predicted, and at that moment, I had no idea just how strange, stressful, and unbelievable the next hours were going to get. The next hour felt longer than the entire morning. I kept glancing at Grandpa, trying to read his expression. He was calm, almost too calm. The kind of calm that told me he had lived through enough strange situations to know when to stay steady. Meanwhile, I was pacing near the living room window, waiting for the police car to arrive. Inside the garage, the woman kept knocking on the door from time to time. Not loudly, not angrily, just enough to remind us she was still there. Every now and then she would call out, but Grandpa didn't respond. He simply sat in his chair, tapping one finger on his knee. "Grandpa," I said softly, "do you think this is going to make things worse with the neighborhood?" He leaned back, folding his hands across his stomach. "Sometimes," he said, "doing the right thing doesn't make everyone happy, but that doesn't make it wrong." I thought about that for a moment. It was the kind of thing only Grandpa could say so simply and still make it sound wise. We didn't have to wait much longer. A few minutes later, a police car rolled slowly up the street and parked in front of our house. The engine shut off, and 2 officers stepped out. They looked calm, not rushed, just doing their job like it was a normal part of their day. Grandpa stood up and walked outside to meet them. I followed close behind, my stomach full of nerves. One officer gave us a polite nod. "Good afternoon. We received a call about an issue involving your garage." "Yes," Grandpa said calmly. "Thank you for coming. It's a bit unusual, but I appreciate your time." He explained everything in a simple, straightforward way: how we found the trucks inside our garage, how the owner refused to move them, how she insisted they would stay until the next day without permission. The officers listened carefully. They didn't interrupt, and they didn't look annoyed. When Grandpa finished, one of them asked, "Is the person still inside the garage?" Grandpa nodded. "She stepped in to adjust her truck and wouldn't leave, even after I asked her to. So I closed the door to prevent any further issues until you arrived." The officer nodded thoughtfully. "All right, we'll speak with her and figure this out." They walked with us toward the garage. Grandpa lifted the door partway, and the woman stepped back quickly. She looked embarrassed, but still defensive. "There she is," Grandpa said quietly. One officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, can you step out for a moment so we can talk?" She crossed her arms but walked out of the garage. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. I told them I'd move the trucks later. The officer kept his tone neutral. "We understand you may have had a reason, but you can't place vehicles on private property without permission. And you can't remain inside someone's garage after being asked to leave." She shook her head. "It wasn't a big deal. The HOA said the street had to be clear." "I needed somewhere to put them," another officer asked. "Did you ask the homeowner if you could use the space?" "I didn't have time," she snapped. "And they weren't using the garage anyway." The first officer sighed lightly. "Private property is private property, even if someone isn't using a space that doesn't give permission to take it." Grandpa stayed quiet beside me, letting the officers handle the conversation. I could feel he wasn't angry. He just wanted things to be made right. The woman grew quieter as the officers continued explaining. It was clear they weren't treating this as a harsh situation, just something that needed correction. After a few minutes, the officers asked her to move the trucks immediately. She didn't argue this time. She walked toward the first truck, opened the door, and backed it out of the garage. I stepped aside as she drove it onto the street. She returned and moved the second one. Though she looked frustrated the entire time, once the garage was empty, one officer glanced inside to make sure everything was fine. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was touched. "We're all set here," he said to Grandpa. "If anything like this happens again, please give us a call right away." Grandpa nodded. "Thank you both. I appreciate your help." The officers gave polite nods and walked back to their car. The woman stood by her trucks, shifting her weight from foot to foot, clearly unsure what to do next. For a moment I thought she would say sorry, or at least acknowledge the trouble she caused. But she didn't. She simply crossed her arms and said, "Well, it's over now. So there's no need to make a big problem out of it, right?" Grandpa looked at her with a calm, steady expression. "I never asked for a problem," he said quietly. "I only asked for respect." She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, but then closed it again. Without another word, she got into one of her trucks and drove off. The second one remained parked on the street. When she was gone, Grandpa let out a slow breath. Not frustrated, not angry. "Just tired? You okay?" I asked. He nodded. "I'm fine. I've dealt with more confusing situations in my life. But this one was something." We walked back inside, and Grandpa sat down in his favorite chair. I knew he needed a moment to let the stress fade. After a few minutes, he looked at me and smiled. "Well, kiddo, Our quiet weekend sure changed quickly, didn't it? I laughed nervously. Yeah, I don't think I'll forget this anytime soon. He tapped the side of his chair. Life likes to test our patience, but it also teaches us how to stand up for ourselves. I thought back on everything that happened. The fear when we first found the trucks, the confusion, the frustration, and finally, Grandpa's calm but firm way of handling things. It was strange, I admitted. But you handled it better than I could have. Grandpa shook his head. I handled it the way someone my age handles it. You'll learn your own way when life throws surprises at you. The garage was finally back to normal. Our tools were accessible again. The space felt like ours, not taken over by someone else. We decided to finish our drinks on the porch. The sun was starting to lower, and the sky had softened into warm shades of gold. It felt like the world was calming down again after a long, unexpected storm. As we sat there, I asked, "Do you think she'll try something like that again?" Grandpa chuckled softly. I doubt it. Not after today. Sometimes people need a wake-up call to realize they can't treat others however they want. I nodded slowly. The neighborhood was quiet again. A few neighbors walked by with their dogs, waving politely as they passed. None of them seemed to know the crazy afternoon we'd just had. For a while, the two of us just enjoyed the stillness. No arguments. No trucks. No noise. Just the sound of the wind brushing against the leaves. After a long stretch of silence, Grandpa finally stood. Well, we never did get to that planter box. I jumped up. We can still do it. There's a little daylight left. He smiled. All right, let's give it a try. We went to the garage, and this time it felt like stepping into our own space again. The shelves were neat. The boxes were in place. The tools were exactly where Grandpa had left them the day before. He grabbed a few boards and laid them out on the workbench. "Hand me that measuring tape," he said. I passed it over, and he started marking the wood with careful lines. He always said good projects started with good plans. While he worked, I found myself replaying the events of the day. It felt unreal, like something out of a movie. But it had happened right here, the quietest street I had ever known. As Grandpa cut the first board, said, "We'll probably get a letter from the HOA about this." I groaned. "Do you think so?" "They don't miss anything," he chuckled. "But don't worry, we'll handle it." I knew he meant it. Grandpa always handled things, even the unexpected ones. We spent the next hour building the frame of the planter box. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And working together helped the tension of the day fade away. When we finally stepped back to look at what we'd built, Grandpa wiped his hands on a rag. "Not bad for a wild day, huh?" I smiled. "Actually, it feels kinda good to end it like this." He gave me a light tap on the shoulder. That's the spirit. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the driveway. The sky turned pink, then orange, then the soft gray blue of early evening. We cleaned up the tools and went back inside, ready for dinner. The house felt peaceful again, like it always did at the end of the day. But even as we sat at the table, soft thought crossed my mind. Something told me this wasn't really the end. Not yet. People who didn't like being told no or being corrected often didn't just disappear quietly, and based on the way the woman drove off earlier. Something about her expression told me she wasn't done thinking about us. I didn't know what would happen next, but I felt certain of one thing. The day might have ended peacefully, but the story was far from over. The next morning, I woke up expecting a normal day after everything that had happened. Maybe a quiet breakfast, maybe some work on the planter box. Maybe even a small joke from Grandpa about unexpected garage guests. But the moment I opened my eyes, something felt different. The house was too quiet. Grandpa always made noise in the mornings. He hummed, shuffled around the kitchen, tapped spoons on pans, or opened windows to let the cool air inside. But today, none of that was happening. I slid out of bed and walked down the hallway. "Grandpa." I called softly, no answer. I checked the kitchen. The stove was cold. The lights were off. His favorite mug was still in the cabinet. That alone worried me. He used that mug every single morning. peeked outside the front window and saw him sitting on the porch staring at the road. Not angry, not upset, just deep in thought. I stepped outside quietly. "Morning," I said. He gave me a small nod. "Morning, kiddo. Everything okay?" I asked. "Mostly," he replied, tapping one finger against his knee, the same gesture he made. The day before, when something was bothering him, I sat down beside him. "Did something happen?" He took a breath and pointed toward the mailbox. "We got an early delivery." I followed his gaze. The mailbox had a small white envelope sticking out of it, the kind that usually came from the HOA. My stomach tightened. "Oh, already?" "Already," he echoed. He handed me the envelope. I opened it carefully, half afraid of what I'd find inside. The letter was short, typed neatly, full of polite but firm wording. It said the HOA had been notified of a disturbance involving us and a neighbor. It said they wanted a written explanation for what happened. And it said they were concerned about the handling of a community member inside the homeowner's garage. Grandpa sighed. I expected something, but not this quickly. I frowned at the paper. "But we didn't do anything wrong. It doesn't always matter to them," he replied quietly. "Some people care more about rules on paper than the real story." He leaned back in his chair. "Don't worry. We'll explain everything. But I doubt it'll be the end of this." I didn't like the sound of that. We went inside and made breakfast together. Grandpa cooked slower than usual, and I could tell his mind was somewhere else. I wished I could say something to help, but I didn't know what. After breakfast, we cleaned up the kitchen, and then Grandpa said, "Let's check the backyard. Fresh air might help clear our heads." We stepped outside, and for a while it felt normal again. The birds were singing. The trees swayed gently in the breeze. The planter box sat against the wall, half finished, but looking better than I expected. Grandpa examined it and smiled. "We did good work yesterday," I nodded, happy to see him smile. But that peace didn't last long. A sudden sound broke the quiet, a loud car horn, sharp and impatient. We turned around to see a familiar truck parked in front of our house. My shoulders tensed immediately. The woman stepped out, slamming the door behind her. She didn't look angry exactly, more like determined. The kind of determined that rarely led to anything good. She marched toward us. "We need to talk," she called out. Grandpa placed a gentle hand on my shoulder before stepping forward. "Good morning. What can I do for you?" She held up her phone. "The HOA called me last night. They said you reported an incident." Grandpa nodded slowly. "I reported that you entered our property without permission." She rolled her eyes. "It was temporary. And now you've dragged the HOA into it? They're asking me for statements. They're asking me for an explanation. Do you have any idea how inconvenient this is?" I stepped forward. "You caused the problem, not us." She ignored me and continued speaking to Grandpa. "You blew everything out of proportion. You could have talked to me like an adult instead of involving the police." Grandpa kept his posture calm. "I did talk to you. More than once. You refused to move your trucks. You refused to leave the garage. I didn't call the police out of anger. I called them to help settle the situation properly." She scoffed. "It wasn't that serious. It was to us," Grandpa replied. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She looked around our yard, then at the garage, then at Grandpa again. Finally, she crossed her arms. "Look, whether you like it or not, the HOA is now involved, and they want this resolved peacefully. So I think you should write a letter saying you overreacted. If you do that, they'll probably drop everything." I stared at her. "Why should we apologize? You used our garage." She raised her chin. "Because the HOA respects me, and they'll believe me if this turns into something bigger." That sentence made my heart drop a little. It wasn't a threat, but it felt uncomfortably close. Grandpa took a slow breath. "We're not writing a letter saying something untrue. We'll tell them exactly what happened. Polite, honest, clear. If you do that, they'll think I caused trouble, and I don't want that on my record." Grandpa gave her a sympathetic look, but it didn't change his answer. "Then you shouldn't have done something that caused trouble." Her face tightened. She didn't yell, She didn't say anything harsh. But the way she looked at Grandpa told me she wasn't going to drop this. "I'll remember this," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked back to her truck. She climbed inside, revved the engine, and drove off. The moment she was gone, I looked at Grandpa. "This is getting worse." He nodded. "Yes, but we'll handle it." We went back inside, and Grandpa sat down at the table. He pulled out a pad of paper and began writing the HOA letter. His handwriting was slow but steady. Every now and then, he paused, thinking carefully about the words. I watched him from across the table. "Do you think the HOA will understand?" "They should," he said. "But there's no guarantee." He finished the letter after about 20 minutes, folded it neatly, and placed it in an envelope, just as he sealed it. There was a knock at the door, a firm one. We both froze for half a second. Grandpa stood and opened the door. It wasn't the woman this time. It was another neighbor, someone who lived across the street. A friendly man who usually waved at us on his morning walks. "Morning," he said, holding a small cup of coffee in one hand. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I heard some things yesterday. Is everything okay?" Grandpa stepped aside, letting him in. "We're all right. Just a bit of a misunderstanding with another neighbor." The man nodded slowly. "Yeah, I heard about that. She stopped by my house earlier. She told me you had her trapped in your garage, nearly choked." "Trapped." He raised his hands. I know. That's why I came over to get the real story." Grandpa explained everything again, calmly and simply. The man listened, nodding with understanding. When Grandpa finished, the man sighed. "Honestly, that sounds more like her. She's been upset with a lot of people lately. You two didn't do anything wrong." His reassurance helped more than I expected, but his next words made me feel uneasy again. "She's telling people around the neighborhood that you're difficult, that you're causing trouble. I wouldn't take it personally, but I just wanted you to know what was being said." I looked at Grandpa. "So she's trying to turn people against us?" Grandpa rubbed his temple. "It seems that way." The neighbor took a sip of coffee. "Don't worry too much. People around here know you too. They know she can exaggerate things. But keep an eye out. She doesn't like being told she's wrong." He left after a few minutes, wishing us well. But his visit left a strange heaviness in the air. I turned to Grandpa. "This is turning into a whole thing." He nodded. "Yes, but we won't get caught up in drama. We'll stay honest, stay calm, and let things settle." I wanted to believe him. For most of the day, we focused on normal tasks. We sanded the planter box. We cleaned the porch. We watered the plants. Each moment pulled us a little further from the tension. But just before sunset, another envelope was slipped into our mailbox. Another notice. Another request from the HOA. Except this time, it wasn't asking for our explanation. It was asking both us and the woman to attend a meeting the following week. A meeting to resolve a neighborhood conflict. I felt my stomach twist again. Does this mean things are getting serious? Grandpa read the letter twice before answering. "It means we'll have to talk this through in front of them. And they'll want both sides." "You think she'll tell the truth?" I asked. He gently shook his head. "She'll tell her version. But we'll tell ours. Calmly, clearly, and the truth will speak for itself." I looked out the window toward the quiet street, where the sun painted everything in soft orange light. A small part of me hoped everything would smooth out soon, but another part knew better. Sometimes, a small spark doesn't fade away. Sometimes it grows into something bigger. And as the sky darkened and the day finally ended, I realized something important. This wasn't the end of the story, not even close. The next morning began with a strange kind of quiet, the kind that makes you wonder if the world is holding its breath. I woke up before the sun rose and sat on the edge of my bed, thinking about everything that had happened. The garage incident, the HOA noise meeting, the late-night patrol Grandpa insisted on doing it, all felt unreal. But at the same time, it had pulled our small family even closer. Grandpa was already outside when I stepped into the kitchen. I could tell by the bright porch light shining through the window. He always woke up early. But today, he He seemed even more alert, as if he had a mission. I made myself a cup of coffee and walked outside. He was leaning on the railing, looking toward the street like he was expecting something. "Rough night?" I asked gently. He glanced at me. "Didn't sleep much. Someone's been driving by slow. Same car, 3 times. My stomach tightened. "Do you think it's her?" He shrugged. "I don't know. But folks who drive around in circles before sunrise usually aren't delivering cookies." I took a slow breath. Tension had wrapped itself around the house overnight. We weren't scared, just on edge. Grandpa was calm as always, but beneath it, I knew he was thinking ahead, planning what to do if things got complicated. The sun started rising, painting the sky in soft orange and pink shades. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like quiet before a storm. By mid-morning, the neighborhood was moving again. People walked their dogs, kids rode scooters, and a couple of HOA board members drove around like they were on patrol. I pretended not to see them as I took out the recycling. Not long after, my phone buzzed. It was a message from one of our neighbors down the street. She wasn't someone who usually talked much, but over the past few days she'd checked in more often. "Saw a tow truck passing by your place earlier. Thought I'd let you know." "A tow truck?" I didn't hear anything. Maybe it wasn't about us, but after everything that happened, I didn't want to ignore any sign. Grandpa was fixing the lock on the back gate when I walked over and told him. He murmured, wiping his hands on a rag. "If someone's planning something, they're getting impatient. And impatient folks do dumb things." I nodded, feeling a little uneasy. "What do we do?" "Same as always," he said. "We stay aware. We stay calm. And we don't let fear push us around." There was something comforting about the way he said it. He had lived through worse far before I came along, and his confidence made me feel grounded. Around noon, the real action started. I was inside folding laundry when I heard loud voices outside. Not angry, just loud enough to catch my attention. I peeked out the window and saw several HOA members standing near the end of our driveway. They weren't yelling, but they looked frustrated and confused, and their hands moved quickly as they talked. Grandpa stood a few feet from them, calm but firm. I set down the laundry and hurried outside. "Everything okay?" I asked. One of the board members turned to me, looking annoyed. "We have reports that your grandfather has been interfering with community patrol and creating an unsafe environment." Grandpa lifted an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Unsafe?" I asked. "He's just keeping an eye on things after someone put 2 trucks in our garage." Another board member, an older man with a clipboard, cleared his throat. "That's under investigation." Grandpa crossed his arms. "Funny how everything's always under investigation until it actually matters." The clipboard guy frowned. "We've noticed your security camera angle was adjusted. HOA rules, state cameras cannot be directed toward the street." I exhaled sharply. "That's for our safety. And the camera still faces our property. It's angled too close to the road." "Because someone keeps driving by slowly at night," I said. "We're not spying on neighbors." The board members exchanged looks. Grandpa took a small step forward. Not threatening, just steady. "You all know the real problem isn't us," he said. "You're ignoring someone who's been breaking rules for months. And now that we finally stood up, you want to blame us for protecting ourselves?" The group shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to anyone challenging them. A moment later, one of them spoke up quietly. "Look, we're just trying to keep the community running smoothly." Grandpa nodded slowly. "Then start by holding the right people accountable." The board members didn't respond. They muttered something about checking records and walked away. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a loss either. More like a shift. Once they were gone, Grandpa turned to me. "They're on the ropes," he said quietly. "They know she caused trouble, but they're scared to admit it. So what now?" "Now we wait. And we keep our evidence ready." The next few hours, things calmed down. I worked on some chores, and Grandpa fixed little things around the house the way he always did. But even then, it felt like we were both paying attention to everything around us. By late afternoon, another message popped up on my phone, this time from a neighbor who lived directly across from the HOA board. Secretary, there's a board meeting tonight at 7. Thought you should know. They're talking about recent issues. Great. That could mean anything. But it didn't sound good. I told Grandpa, and he didn't look surprised. They're trying to cover themselves, he said. But we're going. My stomach did a small flip. Are you sure? It could get heated. Gave me a small grin. I've handled tougher rooms. When evening came, we walked to the community hall. The sun had already dipped, leaving a warm golden glow fading into blue. People gathered outside, whispering and watching. Some nodded at us. Others avoided eye contact. Inside, the meeting room was packed. Folding chairs lined the floor. A long table sat at the front with the board. Members looking tense, we found seats near the middle. The meeting started with normal topics, maintenance updates, landscaping budgets, community events, but you could feel everyone waiting for the real subject. Finally, the board secretary cleared her throat. Next, we need to address recent disturbances in the neighborhood. Here it comes. She talked around the issue at first, avoiding details. But then she mentioned the garage incident. People murmured quietly. We believe misunderstandings have escalated situations unnecessarily, she said. And we want to encourage everyone to follow proper communication channels. Grandpa leaned forward and raised his hand. A few heads turned. The board hesitated, but they had to acknowledge him. Yes, the secretary said. Grandpa stood. I'd like to clarify something for everyone here. The room fell quiet. Someone parked 2 trucks inside our garage without permission. That's not a misunderstanding. That's trespassing. And after we dealt with it, someone started driving by our home late at night. So if we're talking about disturbances, let's be honest about what caused them. Several neighbors nodded. Some whispered. One board member looked irritated. We're still gathering information. Grandpa kept his voice calm. I've already shared the camera footage with the police. So, if information is what you need, I have plenty. The room buzzed with surprise. The board members shifted uncomfortably then. From the back of the room, someone spoke. Why wasn't this dealt with earlier? We've all had issues with the same person. A ripple of agreement spread. The board looked overwhelmed. They weren't used to the community turning on them. After a few more tense exchanges, the board announced they would review everything and schedule a follow-up meeting. It wasn't a resolution, but it was progress. When the meeting ended, several neighbors approached us, offering support, sharing their own stories, even apologizing for not speaking up sooner. As we walked home, the night air felt lighter. You did good, I told Grandpa. He chuckled. I just told the truth. People needed to hear it. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. There were still things brewing under the surface, questions, tensions, and the feeling that the person who caused all this trouble wasn't done stirring things up. Still, for the first time in days, I felt like we weren't alone, and tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring, but we'd be ready. The day after the big community meeting started out calm, almost to calm. The kind of morning where the birds sounded louder than usual, and even the wind felt like it was waiting for something to happen. I woke up hoping everything would slowly go back to normal, but something inside me knew the story wasn't finished. Grandpa was already in the kitchen, sipping his tea and reading the local paper. He wasn't the type to show stress, but the tiny crease between his eyebrows told me he was still thinking about last night. Morning, I said softly. He nodded. Morning. Sleep? Any better? Not really, I admitted. Too many thoughts. What? He folded the paper. That's normal. Big changes shake things up. I sat across from him and watched the steam from my cup rise. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Both of us were wondering what the HOA would do next, or whether the person who caused the trouble would try something again. After breakfast, I stepped outside to water the plants. The sun wasn't too bright yet, and the grass felt cool under my feet. As I watered the small row of flowers along the walkway, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked at the far end of the street. It wasn't unusual to see visitors, but something about the way the car was positioned, half behind a tree, made me uneasy. I watched it for a minute, but nothing happened. No one got out. I shook off the feeling and went back inside. A little later, one of our neighbors knocked on the door. When I opened it, she looked around nervously before speaking. "I didn't want to text this," she whispered, "because I'm not sure who's watching. But I think something's going on." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer. "I overheard someone saying the board is thinking of placing a temporary restriction on your property until everything is resolved. I don't know exactly what that means, but I wanted you to know." I blinked. "A restriction? For what?" She bit her lip. "I'm guessing they want to pressure you into dropping whatever you told the police." Grandpa appeared behind me, hearing just enough to step in. "Thank you for telling us," he said kindly. "We'll take care of it." She left quickly, still glancing around as if she didn't want anyone to see her at our door. When I closed the door, I turned to Grandpa. "Can they even do that?" He sighed. "They can try. Doesn't mean they have the right to." I felt frustration rise. Why are they so determined to protect someone who's clearly breaking rules? Grandpa rubbed his chin. "Because if they admit they ignored complaints, they look bad. And some people would rather twist the truth than face their mistakes." The day went on, but the tension stayed. I tried to focus on cleaning the house and finishing some work on my laptop, but my eyes kept drifting toward the windows. Around noon, I heard footsteps on the porch, soft, quick ones. I went to the window and peeked out. A small envelope was taped to our front door. I froze. Not a knock. Not a ring. Just someone sneaking up and leaving something. I called Grandpa and he came over immediately. He pulled the envelope down, opened it, and read the note inside. His jaw tightened. "What is it?" I asked. He handed it to me. It was a printed notice. "This property is under temporary review for potential violations. Please refrain from unnecessary activity until the review is complete." No signature. No official HOA letterhead. Just a vague threat. "This isn't even official," I said. "They just printed this to scare us." Grandpa nodded. "Exactly. Which tells us they're running out of options." I folded the paper and tossed it on the counter. "What do we do now?" "We keep doing what's right," he said, "and we don't let them intimidate us." In the afternoon, something unexpected happened. A family who lived a few streets over came by, a couple with 2 kids. I had seen them around but never talked much. They introduced themselves and explained they'd been hearing rumors too. "We just wanted to say we're with you," the father said. "We've had our own problems with the board, but we never had the courage to speak up." The mother nodded. "After hearing what happened at the meeting, we realized we should have stood up sooner." Their words warmed me more than I expected. For days it felt like we were alone in a storm. But now more and more people were opening up. We talked for a while, just normal conversation, but comforting in its own way. By the time they left, I felt a little lighter. But the day wasn't over, as the sun went down. Grandpa suggested we take a walk around the neighborhood, not to patrol, but to show we weren't hiding. We strolled down the street, our footsteps slow and steady. A few neighbors waved. Some looked away. Others watched curiously from their porches. When we reached the end of the block, I noticed the same unfamiliar car from the morning. The engine was off, and the windows were slightly tinted. No one was inside. "Strange," I murmured. Grandpa scanned it quietly. "Probably someone watching the board meeting house. People do silly things when they're nervous," then he added. "Or someone trying to see how we react." We continued walking, calmly, without stopping to stare. Later that night, as we sat on the porch, a soft breeze moved through the trees. Grandpa leaned back in his chair. "They're scrambling," he said. "The more truth comes out, the more nervous they get." I nodded. "I just hope this doesn't get worse," he chuckled. "It might, but we'll handle it." He talked a little more before heading inside. I tried to relax, but sleep didn't come easy. Around midnight, I woke up to a faint sound, something like footsteps on gravel. Not heavy, just careful. My heart thumped. I sat up and listened. Another soft crunch. I slipped out of bed and looked out the window. A A shadowy figure stood near the side of the house. Just out of the porch light's reach, my breath caught. I couldn't see their face. I couldn't tell if it was even the person who caused all this, or someone else entirely. Then the figure stepped back, slowly, and disappeared between two houses. I hurried quietly to Grandpa's room and knocked. He opened the door almost instantly, like he had already been awake. "What's wrong?" he whispered. "There was someone outside," I said. "Near the side of the house?" His expression turned serious, but not frightened. "Show me." We moved to the window together, but the figure was gone. Grandpa didn't rush outside. Instead, he checked the locks, made sure the cameras were recording, and then looked at me. "They're testing us," he said, "trying to see if we'll panic." I swallowed hard. "Did you hear them too?" He nodded slowly. "I heard something, but I wanted to see how you handled it." I blinked. "Why?" "Because things might get a little rough before this is over," he said gently. "I wanted to make sure you trusted your instincts." The weight of his words settled in my chest. We stayed awake for a while, just talking quietly in the living room, listening for any other sounds. Nothing else happened, but the tension in the air stayed. Eventually, exhaustion pulled us both towards sleep, before heading to bed. Grandpa paused in the hallway. "This isn't about trucks anymore," he said. "This is about someone trying very hard to keep their mistakes hidden." I nodded. "And failing?" He gave a small smile. "Exactly." I went to bed feeling uneasy, but also more determined than ever. Whatever came next. We weren't backing down, and something told me the next part of this story would reveal more than anyone expected.